really happy to be here today to share about my experience with psychogenealogy and how it can be helpful to you in your life. So first of all, I want to explain what psychogenealogy is. It's made up of two words, psyche and genealogy. And most people know what genealogy is, about the study about your family and ancestors and the dates. And the psyche is who we are. So another way to explain psyche is our personality. You could even say the Greek origin of the word means soul. So it's about looking at finding out who we are. So I would say that psychogenealogy, first of all, is a tool to get to know yourself better. And everyone, of course, would like to know better who they are. We all have parts of ourselves, things inside of ourselves that we don't know about. And this is a way to find out. So the way that we focus is by looking at the invisible loyalties that we have with our ancestors. What we do is we open the family tree with a specific intention, a specific motive. It's at the beginning when people are doing psychogenealogy work, then they want to start gathering information and have as much information as they can about their tree. And then when we start doing the psychogenealogy part, to look for exactly the cause of some particular problem, then we open the tree with a specific intention, like finding out why she's overeating, or finding out why a person has a problem with their pancreas or their kidneys or their lungs, or why they've never been able to get married or have children. So those are all the kinds of things that we look for, that we can work on with psychogenealogy. So the way that these conflicts get transmitted is through the unconscious mind. The person who discovered this, what we call the collective unconscious, was Carl Jung. And we consider Carl Jung to be the father of psychogenealogy. And he discovered this work about almost 100 years ago now. And he has some beautiful quotations in his writings in which he talks about how he had this strange feeling that he was completing situations or solving problems that his ancestors had not solved. For example, I'm remembering a woman who came who was very sad. And the first question we ask is, when did the symptom begin? And she said, I was born sad. So, of course, we know that's not very usual for a baby to be born sad. And so we started looking at her tree. And what we found was that her grandmother lost a baby and never got over it. So that sadness passed on to her granddaughter. And she, of course, had no idea because it was in her unconscious mind. So one of the things that we look for in psychogenealogy is grief that's not complete. It could be grief in the person's life, or it could be grief in the lives of one of their ancestors. Because incomplete grief is one of the biggest conflicts that create problems for people. So another area that I've done a lot of work in is genocide. So I've had quite a few clients who have ancestors from the Jewish genocide in Europe, from the Armenian genocide, also from the genocide in India and Pakistan when they had the partition of India. There was a huge amount of pain at that time, and if it wasn't resolved, then it comes to someone who's alive today for it to be healed. For example, for the Armenian genocide was in 1915, and in 2015 I started to have clients from Armenia, because every 100 years that energy gets moved around and stirred up in the unconscious mind of the people. And many people lost their lives, their family, their children, their money, their homes, their livelihood, and lots of different things. And these conflicts manifest themselves in many different ways in the lives of the people who are alive today. The reason that people come is because they have some type of illness or some type of block, a relationship issue, a financial issue. They've been doing many different types of therapy and haven't found a solution. And that's one of the reasons that we know that people need psychogenealogy, because they've tried a lot of other things and nothing is working. They can't find the block in their own life. And so then it must come from somewhere else. So that where it might come from is from behind, in other words, from their ancestors. And I think I'll start out giving an example because that'll give you a better idea really of how it works. So this woman came to me who was having a problem being overweight. And she had done lots of different types of therapy, many kinds of diets, and she kept eating too much. So we started looking at her family tree, and what we found out was that her great-grandmother had 9 children, and her great-grandfather passed away, and there wasn't enough food to feed everyone. So she, of course, would give the food to her children and would go hungry. So her great-granddaughter was eating for her great-grandmother. And when we discovered that, that's the process we call decoding with psychogenealogy. In other words, she became aware, she became conscious of where this desire to eat came from. And in 1 month, she lost 10 pounds without going on a diet. And now she's lost 70 pounds in the last year and a half about. The information, the conflict is transmitted through the unconscious mind. So for example, my client who was overeating didn't know the story about her great-grandmother. So the information went from the unconscious of her great-grandmother to her grandmother, to her mother, to her, and manifested in this desire to eat. And so then when we become conscious, that's when the healing happens. We all have conflicts. It's a normal part of life. And one of the things that conflict does is that conflict generates stress. And stress programs illness and programs problems and future blocks in the person's life or in one of their descendants' lives. So what happens is our ancestors had conflicts too. So some of those conflicts they solved, and some of the conflicts they didn't solve. And so if they didn't solve the conflict and they've already passed on, then there's no way that they can solve it now. And so what happens is it gets passed on to someone who's alive today so that there's another opportunity for the conflict to be solved. So in psychogenealogy, we don't look at it as a punishment. We look at it as an opportunity. So it's a service that we're doing not only for ourselves, but also for our ancestors and also for our descendants. Because until the conflict is resolved, then it keeps getting passed down from generation after generation. And that was the way that psychogenealogy was discovered 100 years ago, was noticing the patterns that get passed down. So I was thinking of another example I wanted to share. I was treating this man who had cystic fibrosis and lots of liquid in his lungs. And so his girlfriend was dedicated to his healing process. I mean, she dedicated her life to this process. And so we started looking also at her family tree. And what we found was that one of her great-grandfathers drowned in a ferry accident and of course had his lungs full of water, and now she's saving the life of her boyfriend who has lungs. He's drowning in the liquid and the water in his lungs. So it's that kind of thing that we're looking for. Unsolved problem in the lives of our ancestors that gives that impulse to people. We can find it in people's professions. For example, I work with a client who's getting ready to go to medical school. And her mother actually came to one of my classes and we were looking at her tree and decoding. And what she found was that her great-grandfather was out in the country and died because of lack of medical attention. So, and she didn't know this. She found out 1 week before my class. And now her daughter wants to go to medical school. So I had a session with her daughter, and I asked her, I said, do you realize that you're doing this for your great-great-grandfather? And she said, yes. And I said, do you want to do it? And she said, yes. So what happens is, once we decode, then we become free to make a decision. We become free to live our own lives. Because people have like a backpack that they're carrying these conflicts and problems and unresolved issues from their ancestors, and even living the destiny of another person until we become aware. And so then once we become aware, then we become free to choose. So one of the things that people often say is, well, I don't have much information. What do I do if I don't have the information about my ancestors? And we always work with the information that we have, and it's always enough. So one of the things that's amazing for many people is they'll come to me and we start doing their tree. They have very little information, and a cousin will call up and give them information. Their brother or sister will be cleaning out someone's attic and find all these papers and give them the information that they need. It just is a process that really flows with a rhythm of its own. First of all, nothing happens by chance. When people come with an issue, with a block, with a problem, it's not by chance. There's some cause for everything. So usually that's a big relief for people to know that these things that are happening that are really uncomfortable, that they don't understand, have a cause. And the second principle is that everything has a solution. So I've seen trees with lots of problems with murders and robberies and fires and drownings and all sorts of tragedies, babies who passed away and women who died in childbirth. All of these things generate really serious conflicts in the lives of their descendants. And there's always a solution. I worked with a woman who didn't know it at the time, but her ancestor went to jail for a crime that he committed. And his family got together some money and paid a bribe, and he escaped. Well, her son went to jail for a crime that he didn't commit, and he couldn't get out of jail. So once we discovered the information about her ancestor, then it made sense. You know, in psychogenealogy, we talk about balance. You know, usually we think of balance as being positive. In this case, it's not positive or negative, it just is. We talk about the reality principle of Fritz Perls, and Fritz Perls said it is what it is. And so that's just the law of balance in psychogenealogy. The good news is that once we discovered this information, and she became aware, and her son became aware, in 2 weeks he got out of jail. So there are lots of stories that I could tell you about all the different people that I've decoded of trees that we've done and the results that have happened. Another principle of psychogenealogy is that it's not your fault. A lot of my clients come with guilt. I mean, it's just they feel guilty about things that they've done. They feel guilty about things that other people have done. They feel guilty about things that have happened. And it's a big relief to know that it's not their fault. They're programs. These programs are programmed in our subconscious mind. And so as I was mentioning earlier about the woman who was overeating, it went from the unconscious mind of her great-grandmother and passed down to her unconscious mind and then manifested. So what we're doing is finding these programs, and when I talk to my clients, my unconscious mind is connecting with their unconscious mind, and the information starts to bubble up to the surface and come into the conscious mind to be healed. Many times they'll receive information in a dream, so I recommend that my clients pay attention to their dreams after a session, because the dream is the way that the subconscious mind communicates with us, and of course in symbolic terms. And so we can find lots of codes in people's dreams. So I want to finish up telling a little bit about how I got interested in psychogenealogy. I've been interested in genealogy since I was a child. And 32 years ago, I became interested in complementary medicine and studied with Louise Hay for 2 years. And then I began practicing total biology, and psychogenealogy is part of total biology. So total biology is a way to see how stress generated by conflict can be programmed as pain and illness in a person's life. I started out by doing the biological decoding to understand the cause of pain and illness, and then really got fascinated with the psychogenealogy aspects when the clients came from the Jewish genocide, the Armenian genocide, and I really started focusing in this area. Psychogenealogy is really an exciting journey. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's a journey of getting to know yourself better, finding out more information about yourself, who you are, and releasing conflicts that have nothing to do with you that got passed on to you from your ancestors. So I want to invite you, if you feel connected to this idea, everybody is connected to their essence, and their essence can show you what your path is. If this resonates with you, I teach classes in the United States and Brazil and Uruguay. I do consultations by Skype, so I have clients in many different countries around the world. And so there's a lot of information on my website, and you've seen my website along the bottom of the screen there. So I'm here to be of assistance. So if you have any questions, if there's any way that I can help, I love to help people. It's part of my path to do this work. And thank you for listening to this video.